Good afternoon. It's Saturday, the 20th of June. I'm Erin Viner. This is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Security forces today continue the manhunt for the terrorist who killed 25-year-old Dani Gonen of Lod and wounded his companion yesterday. The surviving victim told authorities that the two were driving in the Binyamin region when a Palestinian stopped them to ask if there was water in a nearby spring and then pulled out a gun and shot them before fleeing the scene. A terror faction identifying itself as affiliated with the armed wing of Hamas, named after the two terrorists who killed 3 Israeli teenagers a year ago, is claiming responsibility for the attack, although security sources have yet to confirm the veracity of that statement or determine whether it may have been the act of a lone terrorist. The deadly attack occurred in an area of the West Bank that is off limits to Israeli citizens without advanced coordination with security forces. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the brutal murder proves that Israelis are in constant danger of terror attacks. He emphasized that even though security forces are constantly fighting terrorists with all available means, no one should be misled by the relative calm because schemes to kill the nation's citizens are being devised at all times. President Reuven Rivlin called on Palestinian and Israeli Arab leaders to condemn Gonen's killing and insisted that the state will not accept a situation in which a young hiker is murdered in the land of Israel because he is Jewish.
תפקידו של הנשיא לאחר הבחירות הוא לשמש כנאמן לציבור.
Ambassador to the United Nations Ron Prosor responded to the latest attack by demanding that the United Nations Security Council take a harsher position against Palestinian violence. Prosor said that the UN must put an end to the objectionable practice of calling on both sides to show restraint, since he said only one side bears responsibility for this cruel murder. He went on to cite the recent series of violent actions by Palestinians against Israelis, insisting that instead of advancing peace, the Palestinian leadership actively encourages incitement and destabilizes the region. In diplomatic news, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius is in Cairo today as part of his regional mission to bring Israel and the Palestinians back to the negotiating table. He's holding talks with Arab League representatives in the Egyptian capital as part of an overall strategy to convince moderate Middle Eastern countries, the European Union and the United Nations Security Council to pressure both sides to make compromises as part of a French peace plan. Fabius will also meet with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah and is slated to hold talks in Jerusalem tomorrow with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Fabius also discussed the need to resume the peace process during a telephone conversation with opposition leader Isaac Herzog, who is currently on a diplomatic visit of his own to London. While talking about the Iranian nuclear negotiations, Herzog reportedly told the French foreign minister that it is extremely critical that world powers not compromise on core issues, such as the inspection and monitoring of atomic development sites in the Islamic Republic, stressing that a miscalculation could cause severe damage not only to Israel but to the entire world. And meanwhile, Iran's support for international terrorist groups wasn't only undiminished last year, but in some respects it even expanded. This according to a U.S. State Department report released less than 2 weeks before the deadline to complete a nuclear deal with Tehran, which is expected to provide it with billions of dollars in relief from economic sanctions. The State Department assessment offers a worrying sign of potentially worse terror-related violence to come after a year in which extremists in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia committed 35% more terrorist acts worldwide that killed nearly twice as many people, with the number of abductions nearly tripling. The annual terrorism report underscored the ongoing threat posed by Iran and its proxies across the Islamic world and beyond. The Shiite Ayatollahs in Iran actually increased assistance to Shiite militias fighting in Iraq and maintained their long-standing military, intelligence, and financial aid to Hezbollah, the embattled government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, as well as the Palestinian Hamas and Islamic Jihad terror factions. While the study shows that Iran has lived up to its interim nuclear deals with the world powers so far, it offered no prediction about how the country will behave after becoming infused with cash. The P5+1 nations and Iran are trying to conclude the accord by the end of the month that would impose 15 years of restrictions on its nuclear program in exchange for significant relief from the international sanctions that have crippled the Islamic Republic's economy. Because the negotiations do not address Iran's support for militant groups beyond its border, Israel and the Sunni monarchies in the Persian Gulf fear a fresh wave of terrorism may follow any pact. And the same State Department report shows that the Islamic State has surged to the forefront as the leading jihadist group, having seized on fluid borders and established a strong social media presence to draw record numbers of fighters to Iraq and Syria. As worldwide attacks by all terrorists spiked by more than a third and fatalities soared by 81% last year, ISIS eclipsed al-Qaeda as the most dangerous group. State Department officials say that regional instability played a major factor in the rise of the Islamic State.
Despite significant blows to al-Qaeda's leadership, weak or failed governance continued to provide an enabling environment for the emergence of extremist radicalism and violence, notably in Yemen, in Syria, Libya, Nigeria, and Iraq. The overall flow of foreign terrorist fighter travel to Syria was estimated at more than 16,000 foreign terrorist fighters from over 90 countries as of late December, which is a number that exceeds any similar flow of foreign terrorist fighters traveling to other countries in the last 20 years.
And in related news, Washington is calling on Baghdad for a greater commitment to combat the Islamic State while underscoring the need to also empower Sunni tribesmen and expressing unhappiness over Iraq's failure to supply enough soldiers for training. While speaking at a congressional hearing, U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter said that so far the American contingent has only been assigned 9,000 out of the 24,000 Iraqi security forces they were hoping to train by this fall. U.S. President Barack Obama has been facing mounting pressure to do more to halt ISIS momentum since its seizure of Ramadi last month that widened the Islamist extremist control over predominantly Sunni areas of Iraq. The onslaught also further exposed the shortcomings of Iraq's mainly Shiite forces and raises questions over the ability of the Shiite-led government to overcome the sectarian divide that has helped to fuel ISIS expansion.
I want to underscore a crucial point about our campaign in Iraq and also Syria. It requires capable, motivated, legitimate local ground forces to seize, clear, and hold terrain. That's the only way to ensure a truly lasting, enduring defeat of this movement. The ground campaign is a work in progress. The Iraqi security forces were severely degraded after Mosul fell last June, when 4 divisions dissolved. The combination of disunity, deserters, and so-called ghost soldiers who are paid on the books but don't show up or don't exist had greatly diminished their capacity. However, understanding these challenges does not change reality. ISIL's lasting defeat still requires local forces to fight and prevail on the ground. We can and will continue to develop and enable such local forces because we know from experience that putting U.S. combat troops on the ground as a substitute for local forces will not produce enduring results. That's why DoD seeks to bolster Iraq's security forces to be capable of winning back and then defending and holding the ISIL-controlled portions of the Iraqi state.
The congressional panel also heard from humanitarian personnel working in Syria who testified that civilians are being terrorized by weaponized chlorine used against them by President Bashar al-Assad's forces, whom they're also accusing of consistently targeting opposition-held areas with the double goal of driving them out while simply prolonging the suffering.
This primitive, cheap, and indiscriminate weapon has become a source of constant panic among Syrian civilians due to the fear it spreads when people hear news of its using in nearby areas. This dirty chemical weapon causes physical injuries that show through symptoms like suffocating and fainting, and can lead to death if the injured are not attended to in due course.
Creating a no-bomb zone would stop the most important tools that have been used to slaughter and terrorize Syrian civilians. especially the children who are the most vulnerable, as you've seen, to these toxic gases, and whose small bodies are literally ripped apart by the hideous shrapnel filled in these explosive barrel bombs. I'm a doctor, and I'm very familiar with death, but I have never seen a more obscene way to kill children. I've never watched so many suffer in such an obscene manner.
Today, as the world marks World Refugee Day, aid agencies are currently struggling with a severe shortage of funding and are appealing for greater assistance from the international community, particularly to help those who fled the civil war in Syria.
The Syria crisis is massively underfunded. The world has contributed less than 20% of what's currently needed to be able to respond effectively to this huge scale of 11 million people being displaced within Syria and beyond. Oxfam ourselves have found that raising funds for it is very difficult. The public give very generously when you have an earthquake in Nepal or a typhoon in the Philippines. The complexities, the political involvement, the conflict, the fact that it's man-made, and the fact that it feels like a long-term crisis all aggravate those challenges. But we can't walk away from the people who are suffering.
In the 4 years since the conflict in Syria, more than 4 million refugees have fled the country and are living in nearby host communities. The needs are really great, and as we mark World Refugee Day, I think it's important to remember that these refugees are still here and are still needing our support. Host communities have been very generous in helping them, but the needs are far greater than what the local communities can support.
And here's the story of one Syrian war refugee who, against all odds, became a celebrity master chef in Gaza. 3 years ago, Warif Hamido was running a small restaurant in Aleppo when it was heavily bombed, prompting his flight to Turkey and on to Egypt, where he dreamed of a better life. After struggling to make ends meet, he then faced the decision of risking a dangerous sea journey to Europe that could result in drowning, or try his luck elsewhere. Hamido said that Palestinian friends advised him to go to Gaza, and he was eventually smuggled through one of the tunnels linking the Sinai with the enclave in May of 2013. After enduring unemployment rates of nearly 50% in an economy on the brink of collapse, as well as last summer's conflict, he managed to open his own restaurant in one of Gaza's best neighborhoods. As the venue gained popularity and he became well known for his fine Syrian meals, a local television station asked the 34-year-old to host a cooking show, and this coming week, the 30-episode series will air during the Ramadan holiday. In other news, British Prime Minister David Cameron is urging Muslim communities in his nation and other countries to do more to fight extremism. During remarks at a security conference in Slovakia, Cameron warned against the fostering of radicalism in young people by quietly condoning extremist views.
How does someone who's had all the advantages of a British or European schooling, a loving family, the freedom and equality that allow them to be who they want to be, turn into a tyrannical, murderous, evil regime? There are, of course, many reasons, and to tackle them we have to be clear about them. I'm clear that one of the reasons is that there are people who hold some of these views, who don't go as far as advocating violence, but who do buy into some of these prejudices, giving the extreme Islamist narrative weight and telling fellow Muslims, you are part of this. This paves the way for young people to turn simmering prejudice into murderous intent. It is contradictory, it is futile, but it is particularly potent today. And I think part of the reason it's so potent is that it has been given this credence. So if you're a troubled boy who's angry at the world, or a girl looking for an identity, for something to believe in, and there's something that's quietly condoned online, or perhaps even in parts of your local community, then it's less of a leap to go from a British teenager to an ISIL fighter or an ISIL wife than it would be for someone who hasn't been exposed to these things.
While government efforts can be improved to combat ongoing international attempts to boycott and isolate Israel, in the end, there's really not much that can be done to tackle the phenomenon. That's the view of the director of the Center for National Security Studies at Haifa University, Professor Dan Shiftan, that he expressed to IBA's Efrat Batat.
goes beyond international organizations. It goes into campuses, it goes into the media, and the problem there is somewhat different. What you have is liberalism going mad, bringing liberalism ad absurdum. Until, I don't know, the 80s, to some extent the 90s, a human rights organization basically promoted, when we're defending ourselves legitimately, let's see to it that uninvolved civilians, that innocent civilians will not be hurt. Today, many of them basically support terrorists because this looks good as an issue of human rights. So what we have is the prostitution of the basic values of Western societies.
But it seems that Israel has a problem establishing itself in the international community, getting the message across that it is a human rights country, that it is concerned. Where is the major problem?
We can present things in a more sophisticated way, yes, but if we were perfect and the nicest people would be at the government of Israel, you couldn't really make a case that will still make it possible for Israel to defend itself, because people don't want to listen. Let me put it to you this way. If we would have listened, God forbid, to the people who are doing this to us, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons, and Assad would have had nuclear weapons, and a suicide bomber would be standing here next to us in Herzliya and blowing himself up. We didn't listen to them, and they will never forgive us, particularly when we are right. Okay? I mean, if God forbid we would have listened to these people and tried to be nice in order to win them over, we would not have existed. So, whereas we are not perfect and we are making many mistakes, and very often we are not presenting our message very well, if we would have been perfect, it would not have made a difference. Should we be better? Yes. Should we put more effort into this? Yes. Will it change the picture? No. It's a malaise of what is happening today in Western democracies undermining themselves.
Professor Dan Shiftan, on that grim note, it sounds very grim. You're saying basically no hope.
No. Let me make a distinction here that is very important. There is a dumb optimist and a smart optimist. The dumb optimist says things will be better. The smart optimist says it'll be worse, but we can deal with it. Okay? Israel is the kind of, the Israelis are optimistic in the sense, not what they say to themselves to feel cute. They say a lot of things they don't mean and they don't take seriously. But the fact that they live here and want to live here and build here a very good society basically means that we are saying, yes, the Arab world behaves in a barbaric way all around that, not everybody, but a very large chunk of it. Yes, international organizations have been prostituted, but we will insist on building a good society here, and we have a good life in Israel, and Israelis may as well take credit for what they've succeeded in doing.
IBA's Eli Wogelenter asked Jerusalem Post Knesset reporter Lahav Harko whether members of the Knesset have a plan to fight the BDS movement.
I very much agree. I think that the Knesset members don't really know what to do about BDS, and I think that the government is only now really seriously working on what to do. That's not to say that the government hasn't done anything before, but now they're taking it very seriously. But I'm not sure that it's the average Knesset member's job to know what to do about BDS. And now in the new Knesset, we have people like, Michael Oren, who's the former ambassador to the U.S., who has some very good ideas on this matter, and other Knesset members who have good ideas. But at the end of the day, it's Gilad Erdan who's the minister who's in charge of BDS, so they can suggest things to him. But the average Knesset member can't do that much.
Why do you think the government, everyone in fact, is suddenly taking up the cause against BDS? Why now?
I think that there's been an accumulation of events and bigger players involved in boycotts, and that's why the government has decided to get more involved in fighting BDS. As time goes on, the BDS movement, they haven't had many major successes, but they've increased. The number of successes have increased to the point that the government couldn't ignore it anymore. Knesset member Oren said something very smart about the BDS, which is that until this point, the government outsourced fighting BDS, and there have been a lot of non-governmental organizations that have done a very good job fighting BDS. But
here and in America.
Yeah, here and abroad. But it is a matter of our national security. I think it could be a major threat. At this point, the threat level is not that high, but we need to prevent it from getting higher. And so it is about time that the government get involved.
Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Huldai today addressed rumors that he may throw his hat into the ring in the race to become the next leader of the Labor Party. While speaking at a cultural event in the coastal city, Huldai said that he will announce his final decision within the next few weeks so that he would have enough time to campaign before the holding of the party primaries. The election date hasn't yet been slated, although before leaving for London, current Labor Chairman Herzog said that it will be determined in the coming weeks. The latest that the balloting can be held, according to the party's constitution, is May of next year, although it could also come as early as 3 months from now in September. That option would afford Herzog an edge over his opponents by denying them enough time to organize mass registration drives and possibly affect the outcome. Turning to the weather, and the first day of summer will be pleasantly mild. We can expect a little light rain in the north end along the coast tomorrow morning and no significant change in temperatures. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when Aryeh O'Sullivan will be here to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great week and shalom from Jerusalem.